this edition of Sightings.
I want to go away.
It's okay.
Sightings returns to Colorado's Black Forest to help a terrified family resolve a frightening haunting.
Whoa! You see it? Oh, they're coming through, right here.
When 3-year-old Sarah Skidmore disappeared for 3 days in the Arizona desert, her parents and police knew the only thing that could save her would be a miracle.
I believe my sister, I was her angel.
We have a strong target return.
Later, a sightings investigation continues in Canada with an expedition that searches for debris from a crashed UFO.
Men at the base have told me that it was probably the most intense thing next to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
And has medical science gone too far in its attempt to farm body parts?
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. During a recent sightings ghost investigation in Black Forest, Colorado, our team recorded bizarre noises, images, and thermal imaging that pointed to the presence of an ethereal form. Now, that form is making its presence known in more concrete and threatening ways. Sightings correspondent Carla Wool traveled to Black Forest and found a family in fear.
The sweet smell of pine, a gentle breeze, a beautiful log cabin in the woods. From the outside, there's no hint of the terror that's been experienced inside the Lee home in Black Forest, Colorado.
What is it? I want to go away.
It's okay.
Now, Steve Lee reports a bizarre physical manifestation of the haunting.
One morning, my head just started swelling up. That's when they took me to the hospital and they did the CAT scans. And the doctor said there was no bruise there, no cut or nothing.
So far, Steve and Beth Lee's search for an explanation has cost them their life savings and their peace of mind. Our initial sightings investigation confirmed that the haunting is real. There were the anomalous sounds from Steve's police scanner. A camera fell over without explanation.
It just took a header right off the tripod and landed.
And there were a number of unusual equipment failures. It's fall now, a little more than 6 months since that first visit, and there's a change in the wind. But inside, I found there's been no change in the disturbing haunting activity.
How often are things happening in this house?
Every single night.
Every night?
Every single night.
And Steve and Beth can no longer shelter their boys from the paranormal phenomena.
Stephen, what kinds of stuff, strange stuff, have you seen around your house?
Lights, shadows in my room. When I was watching TV, the TV kept going on and off, and just strange things.
Why do you stay here with your kids and with these types of things happening?
Because we want it solved and we want to keep our house. Until you sit in our shoes, you won't understand. That's the best way to explain it.
I've been through so much, I'm not going to move.
Steve believes that if the family moves, the entity, as captured in these photos, wins. He and Beth have spent more than $30,000 on surveillance equipment and other high-tech devices, searching for an explanation. But when sightings suggested an in-depth psychic investigation, the family, who said they would try anything, wanted to sleep on it. The next morning, they agreed.
Peter James is coming here tonight. What are you hoping he can do or tell you?
I'm a little bit more open-minded than he is as far as believing some things from the spiritual world, but I hope that what he can do is explain some things that are happening.
Peter James has been given no information about what's transpired in the Lee home. But as soon as he steps out of the car, Peter senses why we've brought him here.
There's a lot of death around here. There is a lot of activity here.
Inside, Steve keeps his distance as Peter begins his survey.
Who's here? Identify yourself.
Peter is immediately drawn upstairs to the master bedroom. During our previous sightings investigation, paranormal researchers identified this bedroom as one of 3 significant areas of haunting activity.
Right here. Ooh, feel it? Something just touched me there. Feel it?
I feel cold.
It's a cold spot.
I also feel it right here.
It's a cold spot. This is a cold spot.
And when Peter begins to feel the pull of an energy vortex, the Lees begin to listen.
But it feels like someone has their arms around my legs right now. And I'm chilled to the bone right now.
Then Peter begins to feel an overpowering presence of something chemical or medicinal in the air. He believes this has a connection to the haunting. It's a psychic impression that catches Steve completely by surprise.
There's a chemical smell. I smell something old, like...
You get goosebumps?
I get chills.
When Peter feels he's connected with the entity responsible for the haunting, he proposes a name.
I also get a name of Howard.
The the Howard one, there's no, I mean, that's so personal between us, it's unreal. There's no possible way on God's earth you could have known that one.
Do you ever feel that Howard is trying to protect you?
Yes, very much so.
Because that's what I
just
feel.
freaked you out, didn't it?
Yes.
Does that make sense to you?
Yes, that's why I said don't
Let's take
say
a break.
anything.
Let's take a break. That's enough for me.
Very much so.
But Peter can't seem to take a break from the psychic impressions flooding his mind.
Was there anyone around here that was a pharmacist?
That's too much, isn't it?
Yes or no? Yes or no? Tell me.
Howard was very involved in that kind of stuff.
Beth, who is Howard?
I have a little adopted granddaddy here in town that I have guardianship of that we've taken care of for like 10 years now or more. And his name is Howard, and he had a son that we did not know, but that he died in the 60s of a drug overdose, and his best friend's dad was a doctor and into pharmacist work, and they would steal prescriptions.
The son's name is Howard Jr., the Howard that Peter has felt so strongly in the Lee home. Peter returns to the bedroom to try to make contact.
There's that chemical smell again. And you know what? I believe that Howard is with me right now. He's very protective of them, and, but I...
Actually, no, wait, I smell it this time.
Smell it?
Yes, I do smell something.
Smell something?
The burning kind of chemical, chemical.
Howard is here.
Peter says that Howard has entered through the energy vortex.
Right in here, you're talking.
Right in there?
Yeah.
Peter believes it's a rip in the fabric of time that allows spirits to move from their plane into ours.
It's coming, they're coming through. Look, right here.
Peter feels that Howard Jr. wants to make contact with the Lees because of their connection to his father. Howard has unfinished business on Earth and feels that the Lees can help him communicate that he did not die of a drug overdose.
We're talking murder.
Yeah. And this is what I really feel why he's here and why he's trying to convey this message to me now.
To make the haunting stop, Peter says the Lees must appease Howard. And in fact, they are finding many suspicious circumstances surrounding Howard's death.
Well, I guess I'm a little bit more open-minded about it now. I mean, there's things that there's no way he could have known. I mean, there's just no way on God's earth he could have known. I guess I have to believe now.
Before he left, Peter reassured the Lees that Howard is not a vindictive entity and that he may actually be protecting the family from other spirits who've squeezed through the vortex. The Lees hope that if they can put one spirit to rest, the others may soon follow.
The Lee family believes that Peter James has gotten closer to the source of the haunting activity than any other paranormal investigator. But both Peter and the Lees feel that his work there is not complete. We hope to bring you more from the house on a future broadcast.
Next, the miraculous link between a kidnapped girl and her little sister. Later, searching for the truth in the mysterious UFO crash at Shag Harbour.
According to a Time magazine survey, more than 2 out of 3 Americans believe in angels. Among them, the Skidmore family of Mesa, Arizona. But simple statistics can't begin to measure the power that the Skidmore's belief in angels has had on their lives. It was a belief that was sorely tested on the day 3-year-old Sarah disappeared. In the fall of 1986, the desert quiet and tranquility of Mesa, Arizona seemed like nothing more than a mirage. The family town was rocked by the kidnapping of one of its own, 3-year-old Sarah Skidmore.
She was kind of a bouncy little kid, always into trouble and always jumping on, you know, always wanting hugs and kisses and jumping on you and mauling you, and she was always fun. The day that Sarah was kidnapped, everything changed. Everything was different. It's just unimaginable.
On Tuesday, October 7th, 1986, Rhonda Skidmore received an urgent call from her 5-year-old son Robert's school.
I had to go to the school to help Robert. And so I took some things into the school and I left my little kids in the car. When I came back, the little boy in the car that had been babysitting, he said, a man took Sarah out of the car, and he was serious. And I looked around, and she was nowhere.
For the first 48 hours, state police conducted an exhaustive search for Sarah and her kidnapper. He was described by an eyewitness as a heavy-set, bearded man wearing a baseball cap.
After Sarah disappeared, our other children were questioning, wondering where she was, asking if she was going to get some dinner. What is Sarah having for dinner tonight? Is Sarah hungry? Where is Sarah going to sleep? She doesn't have her pajamas. Robert went to the front door and just screamed, Sarah, Sarah, trying to call her home. And he did that until his voice was totally spent.
After 2 days, the authorities narrowed their search. There were indications that Sarah's kidnapper may have retreated into the harsh desert backcountry, where there was no water and no shelter from the elements.
This incident occurred in the fall time, which in Arizona we see our greatest extremes, the extreme heat, the extreme cold. Children lose heat and become dehydrated very quickly, and it could even progress to a point of unconsciousness, what we call heat stroke, and a large percent of those patients could die.
On day 3, there was an unusually violent thunderstorm.
We actually had one news reporter say, how will you feel when they find her dead body?
The next morning dawned clear and calm. The Skidmores were praying for a miracle. Zane Bingham did not hear the prayers, but he answered them.
I was hunting quail. I hit one. Upon retrieving it, walking up to where it was laying, I picked it up, looked across the wash to the left, where the rest of the covey had flown to. And upon doing so, I saw her in the wash looking at me. The closer I got to her, I noticed that she had been out there apparently for a while because she had lots of scratches all over her legs, her arms, and everything. She wasn't walking very good because she was barefooted. Her feet were tore up. And I asked her if she wanted me to carry her, and she replied yes. It amazed me that she wasn't crying or whining about nothing. No, not at all.
Bingham rushed Sarah to the nearest sheriff's station. She was immediately airlifted to Lutheran Hospital in Mesa. Sarah had been abandoned in the desert by her kidnapper and had spent 3 days and nights in the desert without food or water.
They were very amazed that she survived that Thursday night because it was so cold and it was so windy. And they said that the exposure should have put her in a coma. Because of her weakened condition, she should not have been able to survive it.
Doctors pronounced Sarah's recovery a miracle. A few days later, Sarah herself offered a mysterious clue to her miraculous survival.
She didn't really react to us. She recognized us and just kind of stared at us. And finally she said, I saw Heather playing, and Heather's her 2-year-old younger sister. And that's all that she said really so far.
She said what? Anything about the man that
She hasn't said anything other than, I saw Heather playing.
Do you know what she meant by that?
We don't know.
Heather was 2 years old at the time and could not have been playing in the desert alone. The meaning of Sarah's mysterious vision became clear when she began revealing more details of her abduction and the ordeal that began when Sarah's kidnapper abandoned her in the desert.
She mentioned that she was really, really hungry, really, really thirsty, and her feet hurt because of all the cactus thorns. And then she started talking about the little girl that she saw in the desert.
She had blonde hair and bluish eyes, and she was in white clothes, and her hair was about shoulder length, a little longer. And she had a glow around her, and she wasn't standing on the ground. She was kind of up in the air. I felt like she was telling me it'd be all right and that I'd be okay.
Sarah was more than a mile from the nearest road, but somehow she found her way to safety by following the angelic vision.
She was walking and she saw the little spirit standing there, and it caused her to turn and walk a different direction. And when she walked the other direction, then that's when she found the hunter. And she felt like that helped her go the right way.
A year later, Rhonda Skidmore gave birth to her 5th child, a baby girl named Jessica. When Jessica was 3 years old, Sarah looked at her baby sister and suddenly realized that it was Jessica, not Heather, who had been her angel.
Sarah just was watching Jessica, and she said, I feel like Jessica was the one that was in the desert when I needed the help.
I think it was me. I believe my sister, I was her angel.
The Skidmore's religious belief in preborn spirits is gaining a lot of attention among paranormal researchers. After her own encounter with what she believed was a preborn spirit, Sarah Hines, educator, author, and mother of 9, began compiling similar case studies in her book, Coming from the Light.
I found the belief in a premortal existence prevalent in a variety of cultures. When these unborn spirits or unborn souls make their appearance known, they're generally there to deliver a message. And the most prevalent message is that it's time for them to come to Earth.
During her research, Hines contacted Paul Perry, a best-selling author and journalist who is an acknowledged expert in near-death experience. Hines and Perry compared case studies and found an astonishing link. Many survivors of the near-death experience report seeing not only their past, but also spirit beings waiting to be born.
Many people who see preborn spirits in the course of a near-death experience, when they come back, they describe these as being very comforting to see.
Sarah truly feels that her unborn sister, Jessica, was the guardian angel that protected her when she was in danger.
With the loving support of her family, 12-year-old Sarah Skidmore has healed well from her ordeal in the desert. But she still carries with her clear memories of her miraculous helper.
I still think Jessica is my angel because I think that she must love me, and I think I love her more just because of what has happened.
Sarah Skidmore's recovery in the Arizona desert is a reminder that miracles do occur. It's also a reminder that it only takes a moment for a child to disappear.
Next, the latest word on farming body parts, how voodoo is making neighborhoods safer, and later, getting beneath the surface of the Shag Harbour mystery.
Here are some of the stories Sightings is following in the news. The latest crime figures just out from the Federal Bureau of Investigation are encouraging. The rate and actual number of violent crimes are down. Factors contributing to the decrease include neighborhood watch programs, better policing, and, if you talk to one group in New Orleans, voodoo. In New Orleans, Louisiana, residents in Bywater, a neighborhood perched at the edge of the French Quarter, saw that their historic community was caught in a downward spiral of crime and drug abuse. But people here have not stood idly by. Instead, they have turned to an old New Orleans tradition. They've turned to voodoo.
It just seemed to me that we needed to go to a higher authority. It was not going to do us any good to just get angry and feel helpless.
Sally Ann Glassman has been a student and practitioner of the voodoo religion for more than 20 years. She suggested to her neighbors that they hold a public ceremony to call forth what is known in voodoo as Ogun, the god of war. It was an effort to rid the neighborhood of evil forces, and more than 150 people attended the evening ceremony.
At first, a lot of people, especially the criminals out, were very, stay away from me, get away from me, I don't want you near me with that.
They're scared of the police. They respect the Loas. They've grown up around it as part of the culture here. All their lives, their grandmothers have talked about it, and moms and dads have talked about it. There's a healthy respect for it.
Since the first ceremony on August 17, 1995, Glassman has continued to lead weekly rituals to honor Ogun and other spirits called Loas. Recent crime statistics seem to add credence to her claims that crime is down.
The crime rate has dropped remarkably from about 50 robberies a month, I've heard, to 6 to 8 robberies a month. That's a big difference.
While the New Orleans Police Department will not comment on Bywater's unique approach to neighborhood watch, they can't argue with its apparent success.
At the very least, everyone knows that everyone else was willing to hang on to hope and to take this sort of action or any sort of action and to work together. That's a bonding experience. That's what community is supposed to be about.
In Boston, Massachusetts, researchers are debating the medical merits and ethical consequences of the world's first bioengineered human body part, grown on the back of a laboratory mouse.
When I first saw this, I was amazed, because here we are, we're growing human tissue on a mouse, and it's got the shape of an organ. I've never seen anything like this before.
The ear was constructed from biodegradable fibers and human cartilage cells donated by the intended recipient. It was then implanted under the skin of a hairless mouse, where it took shape. The ear will be ready for human transplantation in 2 years.
We're going to start with simple things first. Replacing the skin of somebody who's been severely burned, fixing worn-out knees. And after that, we're going to move on to more complex organs and start replacing those. We've got a long way to go before we can farm a body.
For doctors and others concerned with medical ethics, the dilemma is not when will mass body part farming begin, but should it?
What are the limits to which we are going to go to fix people? Do we want to put our resources into replacing organs, replacing pieces of people, or do we want to put our resources into keeping people healthy in the first place?
You could say that tiny Rachel, Nevada is the town that aliens built. Rachel has become the unofficial watering hole for amateur ufologists eager for a close encounter of any kind. And in September 1995, the Nevada State Assembly passed a bill to officially redesignate Rachel's main drag, State Highway 375, as Nevada's extraterrestrial alien highway. It's an apt name, legislators argued, for a road that borders Area 51, the reputed site for many top-secret government spacecraft projects and the site of frequent UFO sightings. After a push from legislators and the State Tourism Office, the Nevada State Transportation Board has agreed to put up new extraterrestrial highway signs beginning in the spring of 1996. Governor Bob Miller has suggested that the signs be placed flat on the ground so that aliens can see them and know where to land. We'll have more stories from the news next time. Now, here's what's coming up on Sightings.
Will Shag Harbour give up the secret of what crashed here nearly 30 years ago? Later, he's the father of the theory that revolutionized our view of a world he calls Gaia.
The Earth has properties like those of a living organism.
Recently, we brought you a report on the mysterious crash of a suspected UFO in Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia. Working with Canadian researcher Chris Stiles, Sightings has uncovered startling new government reports and has interviewed key eyewitnesses. There's enough evidence here to warrant a new kind of sightings investigation, our first UFO salvage operation. Whatever crashed into Shag Harbour nearly 30 years ago was seen by many eyewitnesses who have all come forward with strikingly similar descriptions of the incident.
An unusual object described as being 60 feet in diameter with 4 bright white lights was seen to hover in the sky over the Shag Harbour area, tilt at a 45-degree angle, and then drop into the sky and hit the surface of the water. Eventually, the Coast Guard, Rescue Coordination Center, Navy, and RCAF were brought into the search effort for the object responsible.
Chris Stiles has conducted an exhaustive search for documentation regarding the historic and mysterious crash of October 4th, 1967. He has found a significant government paper trail.
The Navy did have a strong expectation of finding artifacts. In the document, it actually names a scientific consultant who was on standby to receive debris. The search conducted by the Navy concentrated in this area.
In October 1995, Sightings launched its first ever salvage operation under the direction of Chris Stiles. Our goal was to locate and retrieve any pieces of UFO wreckage large enough to have resisted the forceful tides and currents in Shag Harbour. By all accounts, the odds were stacked against us, but this operation would offer a unique opportunity to apply scientific methods to an incident rife with rumor and conjecture. If debris could be found, our team would find it.
We hope to take the searched areas beyond the former military search and perhaps check out some of these target detections and the impact site, which was actually outside of the search already conducted by the Navy.
28 years had passed since the crash at Shag Harbour. Time was not on our side, but state-of-the-art detection equipment unimagined in 1967 would improve our chances.
Prepare for tracking sequence at heading 159, over.
There is 500 kilohertz digital side-scan sonar for seabed profiling and target detection. Aerial trajectory plotting.
Roger, survey 1, commencing sequence, over.
A towed array GEM magnetometer for underwater metal detection, and a GPS satellite tracking system to pinpoint potential targets. Our intention was to scan and search 3 main areas of the ocean floor in the waters off Shag Harbour. These areas corresponded to eyewitness recollections and coordinates taken from a document reporting where the initial government search took place in 1967.
Sonar buoy drops out of nearby Canadian Forces Base Greenwood and the magnetic anomaly detection grid at the nearby Shelburne Base, which was the coordination center for submarine detection in the Atlantic, led the authorities to believe that perhaps the largely intact object was still moving under the water.
But where it came to rest remains a mystery. Reports that wreckage was recovered from Shag Harbour on the night of the crash dictate that we begin our operation there.
Men at the base have told me that it was probably the most intense thing next to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which left the base on alert for 34 days.
The sightings investigation heads out to sea after months of onshore planning. The 3 targeted areas are scanned for potential pieces of wreckage, called targets, and each target is given a priority designation.
We were able to lay down an extensive grid pattern and pick up numerous target detections, which we gave an assessment value for high strangeness. A very simple system of 1, 2, or 3.
The initial search shows no high-priority targets in Area 1, the section of ocean shore closest to the Nova Scotia mainland. Rather than send divers down to investigate lower priority targets, the team agrees to move further out and begin a grid pattern search of Area 2.
Attention bridge, this is control. We have a strong target return.
Target detection is one thing. Going down and confirming what the target is much harder indeed. We were actually getting returns off some of the very large kelp beds that produce shadows and images that were misleading. The environment presents perhaps the main challenge in doing a thorough search. Extreme current conditions are almost constant.
What was the current like down there?
The current's building up. It's going to get worse.
conditions are deteriorating, it's my feeling that we should move on and perhaps check other targets.
But the divers press on, eliminating all of the potential targets in Area 2. The search then moves on to the deeper waters of Area 3. In Area 3, there are a number of high-priority targets worthy of investigation. The divers begin a systematic search, working into the night when a particularly promising spike hits on radar.
Control, we are approaching target area.
In the control room, the team watches the divers' progress. Individual propulsion systems and high-powered underwater lights assist the divers who are fighting increasing tidal currents and a backwash of silt from the ocean floor. As the divers close in on their bearing, they realize that the ocean currents are distorting sonar readings, giving a high-priority signal to nothing more than an unusual rock formation. The team is disappointed, but Chris Stiles is undaunted. He has eliminated 3 crash sites and can now move forward to another area where some government eyewitnesses have told him UFO debris may still be found.
I've spoken with several of the divers in the past and other support naval personnel that were involved in this, and early on they told me the story of the Shelburne connection, and it just keeps resurfacing, resurfacing. It's a story that won't go away.
That story when Sightings continues.
Next, more from our Shag Harbour investigation. And later, the future of planet Earth.
There's no possibility of fighting back. There's only consequences.
Admittedly, Sightings is searching for an extraterrestrial needle in a haystack by diving beneath the waters of Shag Harbour, Nova Scotia. Even if the APRO document is a roadmap to a submerged UFO, we don't know what the craft is made out of. Would UFO debris rust, melt, or could it be that someone has simply beaten us to it? When the sighting search and salvage operation failed to turn up UFO wreckage or debris in 3 significant areas off the coast of Shag Harbour, Chris Stiles did not give up his investigation. He feels there is simply too much information about the mysterious UFO crash of October 4th, 1967, to abandon his search for the truth. First, there was consistent testimony from credible eyewitnesses.
We see lights moving through the sky that we thought to be an airplane at first. And there was 4 in sequence. 1 would come on, and 2, and 3, and 4.
It was reddish orange in color, and they seemed to be on about a 45-degree incline, and the lights seemed to be going in a downward motion.
This thing headed down, crashed on the water, and at that time all the lights went off, and 1 other light came on a few minutes later, and that's the light that was there when I arrived on the scene.
Royal Canadian Mounted Police Officer Ron Pond not only saw the Shag Harbour UFO, he also interviewed eyewitnesses at the scene.
There were witnesses coming from a variety of directions and in different locations, so there was no way that it was a conspiracy or any kind of an attempt to mislead anybody. It was definitely something that came down on the water.
In addition to credible eyewitnesses, Chris Stiles has uncovered a trail of documentation, leading him to conclude that the U.S. and Canadian governments knew about and monitored the Shag Harbour UFO.
The more we find, the more there is, you know. I mean, sources of even the paper trail in this have hardly dried up.
And there was this exclusive interview with a member of the Canadian military who had been debriefed as part of a Shag Harbour naval recovery operation.
I was told that it had hit the water, crash landed, in trouble, and had actually moved underwater, and I think that was one of the more interesting points that I found of the whole story, because this thing was not only aerodynamic, but hydrodynamic also. It had the capacity to travel in 2 mediums.
According to this source, the UFO continued traveling underwater and finally came to rest several miles from the impact site.
Near where the UFO had moved, there was a high top-secret listening post for submarine detection.
This claim of a second location of an unidentified flying object resting on the bottom, somewhere off Government Point in the water, is very interesting, because this location was the spot where Canadian Forces Station Shelburne was located.
It is quite possible that there is something laying down there. Somewhere between the crash site to the site that has moved, it's hard to move that amount of physical energy around and not leave some sort of a trace.
Because Sightings' initial scientific search of Shag Harbour failed to turn up any debris, Stiles is now exploring the possibility that the crash site was 25 miles to the north, near Shelburne. It was here that a second Navy dive reportedly took place on the night of the crash.
When I spoke to the divers and support personnel early on, they told me that at the Shelburne end of the operation, where they sat over this craft for a week, that it was on the bottom and that there was still activity in it. Furthermore, there was a second craft there which was lending assistance. They believed that this was a vehicle of extraterrestrial origin. And these men had lengthy experience.
Their commanding officer would debrief them and tell them not to open their mouth. The story would not be discussed again. I can only imagine that he would assign some people to ensure that those people do keep quiet.
Although he has uncovered a mountain of documentation confirming civilian sightings of the Shag Harbour UFO, Stiles has found almost nothing on paper to confirm military operations in Shelburne or Government Point.
I've looked at some unique strategies and tried to be creative. For example, off Government Point, there's an area called McNutt Island, which has a manned lighthouse. I attempted to obtain the lighthouse logs, thinking that perhaps any naval operation that kept ships in the area for 7 days would show in the lightkeeper's records. These were not forthcoming. Attempts with the Coast Guard to get these seemed to indicate that these records were lost. It seems that I could get earlier records and those after, but October's were missing.
It is Stiles' belief that considerable work remains to be done in the Shag Harbour UFO investigation. Raw data needs to be analyzed further, and uncharted target sites offshore must be scanned. The elimination of 3 potential impact sites during the first Sightings salvage operation is only the first step to what may be a very long road.
Shag Harbour is still a mystery. However, I feel that this case will reveal a lot about the nature of the UFO phenomena and may have some answers that even challenge our established belief systems.
It's only been since late 1994 that the Canadian military has allowed civilian operations in the waters off Government Point. Chris Stiles now plans to focus future operations in the area near Shelburne, Nova Scotia.
Next, what can we learn from James Lovelock's Gaia theory?
The man and woman in the street understand Gaia far better than my colleagues do.
On past programs, we've introduced you to a number of people who support the Gaia theory, that the Earth is an organism with its own intelligence. Now, Sightings correspondent Carla Wohl interviews the father of the Gaia theory, James Lovelock.
It's been more than 20 years since he first introduced his groundbreaking Gaia hypothesis. Today, inventor-scientist James Lovelock and his wife Sandy live and work on a 35-acre estate in the Cornish Highlands, which he's preserving as a wildlife habitat.
How did you come up with the Gaia theory?
Well, I was very fortunate in 1961. I got a letter from the Director of Spaceflight Operations of NASA. They wanted to use my gadgets, these sensitive devices, for analyzing the lunar soil to see if it would be safe for astronauts to go there. But it wasn't long before I became interested in the next big step, which was to go to Mars. And the question, how do you find if there's life there?
Lovelock determined that Mars was almost certainly lifeless because its atmospheric composition was static, in contrast to Earth's composite parts, which are highly volatile.
So I then thought, well, if it's an atmosphere like that, highly unstable, something must be keeping it constant, because it couldn't stay constant on its own. And that set me thinking about a regulating system at the Earth's surface, which presumably was life itself. And then this idea of Gaia was born in my mind.
Since then, Lovelock's Gaia theory has been embraced and embellished on by scientists, environmentalists, and New Age philosophers who believe Gaia is a sentient being with the capacity for intelligence, emotion, even vengeance.
I don't really now regard the Earth as a living organism. I think in the early days of Gaia, we used the term the Earth is alive metaphorically. What we meant was that the Earth has properties like those of a living organism. It's able to regulate its temperature, and it's able to regulate its chemistry. And that was all we meant by it.
What do you think of the theories that are now coming out? People call it Gaia's revenge, that the Earth is fighting back with diseases like AIDS and Ebola and getting rid of the human parasite.
Oh, I don't like it one bit. Gaia is in no way sentient. Not at all. There's no possibility of fighting back. There's only consequences.
While he does not regard the Earth as an angry, vengeful planet, the father of the Gaia theory is deeply concerned by humankind's apparent disregard for the delicate balance between our planet and her life-sustaining atmosphere. What is the greatest danger to us right now?
If you're talking about human dangers, so we're now talking in terms of hundreds of years, not millions or billions of years, there's a distinct possibility that a large chunk of ice, which is supported above the water by a ridge in Antarctica, it's called the West Antarctic Ice Sheet, may slip off into the ocean. It did so 120,000 years ago during another interglacial, and if we go on warming the Earth up by adding CO2 and things, it may well slip off again. When it does, it's estimated there will be a maximum rise of sea level of about 15 feet. But even if only a part of it drops off, and there's only a rise of 5 feet of sea level, this will be enough to take out many of the major cities around the world. London would certainly go. New York would be gravely under threat. Houston would probably go, Miami, all sorts of cities.
Is there anything that we can do to slow that process, or is it inevitable?
I honestly don't think there's much we can do to slow it. I think it would be too difficult to get all of the nations of the world together to say we're going to stop burning fossil fuels. And we'll just have to hope that the cooling off towards the next ice age offsets the global warming due to the CO2 increase. But it's not a very hopeful thought.
But Lovelock does find hope in the fact that the average person's environmental awareness is much greater now than it was when he first proposed the Gaia theory nearly 25 years ago.
I've always found that the man and woman in the street understand Gaia far better than my colleagues do. The rules are quite simple. If you live well with the environment and improve it, you improve the chances for your progeny. And that means, according to Darwin, your species will survive and flourish. But if you do things that are bad for the environment, your species is doomed.
The overriding message in Lovelock's work is that Gaia is tough, but not indestructible. Gaia can heal if we can just stop making her sicker.
If you've had a paranormal experience, please write to us at Sightings. Sightings can also be contacted at America Online at keyword Sightings. At the Sightings Forum, download images, sounds, and QuickTime clips. Also, join us daily in our chat room, live on AOL.
Until next time, remember, no mystery is closed to an open mind. For Sightings, I'm Tim White.
Next on Sci-Fi, Dark Shadows.
Sci-Fi World.
Monday, Superhero Land. Tuesday, Creature Land. Wednesday, Intergalactic Land. Danger! Thursday, Fantastic Land. Friday, Inhuman Land.
Sci-Fi World, chain reactions of sci-fi's greatest hits. Weekdays, 11 to 4, Eastern and Pacific on Sci-Fi.
Some things from the spiritual world, but I hope that what he can do is explain some things that are happening.
Peter James has been given no information about what's transpired in the Lee home. But as soon as he steps out of the car, Peter senses why we've brought him here.
There's a lot of death around here. There is a lot of activity here.
Inside, Steve keeps his distance as Peter begins his survey.
Who's here? Identify yourself.
Peter is immediately drawn upstairs to the master bedroom. During our previous sightings investigation, paranormal researchers identified this bedroom as one of 3 significant areas of haunting activity.
Right here. Ooh, feel it? Something just touched me there. Feel it?
I feel cold.
It's a cold spot.
I also feel it right here.
It's a cold spot. This is a cold spot.
And when Peter begins to feel the pull of an energy vortex, the Lees begin to listen.
But it feels like someone has their arms around my legs right now, and I'm chilled to the...
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. During a recent sightings ghost investigation in Black Forest, Colorado, our team recorded bizarre noises, images, and thermal imaging that pointed to the presence of an ethereal form. Now, that form is making its presence known in more concrete and threatening ways. Sightings correspondent Carla Wool traveled to Black Forest and found a family in fear.
The sweet smell of pine, a gentle breeze, a beautiful log cabin in the woods. From the outside, there's no hint of the terror that's been experienced inside the Lee home in Black Forest, Colorado.
What is it? I want to go away. It's okay.
Now, Steve.
On this edition of Sightings.
I want to go away. It's okay.
Sightings returns to Colorado's Black Forest to help a terrified family resolve a frightening haunting.
Whoa! You see it? They're coming through, right here.
When 3-year-old Sarah Skidmore disappeared for 3 days in the Arizona desert, her parents and police knew the only thing that could save her would be a miracle.
I believe my sister, I was her angel.
We have a strong target return.
Later, a sightings investigation continues in Canada with an expedition that searches for debris from a crashed UFO.
Men at the base have told me that it was probably the most intense thing next to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
And has medical science gone too far in its attempt to farm body parts?
Stephen, what kinds of stuff, strange stuff, have you seen around your house?
Lights, shadows in my room. When I was watching TV, TV kept going on and off, and just strange things.
Why do you stay here with your kids and with these types of things happening?
Because we want it solved and we want to keep our house. Until you sit in our shoes, you won't understand. That's the best way to explain it.
I've been through so much, I'm not going to move.
Steve believes that if the family moves, the entity, as captured in these photos, wins. He and Beth have spent more than $30,000 on surveillance equipment and other high-tech devices, searching for an explanation. But when Sightings suggested an in-depth psychic investigation, the family, who said they would try anything, wanted to sleep on it. The next morning, they agreed.
Peter James is coming here tonight. What are you hoping he can do or tell you?
I'm a little bit more open-minded than he is as far as believing.
Steve Lee reports a bizarre physical manifestation of the haunting.
One morning, my head just started swelling up. That's when they took me to the hospital and they did the CAT scans. And the doctor said there was no bruise there, no cut or nothing.
So far, Steve and Beth Lee's search for an explanation has cost them their life savings and their peace of mind. Our initial sightings investigation confirmed that the haunting is real. There were the anomalous sounds from Steve's police scanner. A camera fell over without explanation.
It just took a header right off the tripod and landed.
And there were a number of unusual equipment failures. It's fall now, a little more than 6 months since that first visit, and there's a change in the wind. But inside, I found there's been no change in the disturbing haunting activity.
How often are things happening in this house?
Every single night.
Every night?
Every single night.
And Steve and Beth can no longer shelter their boys from the paranormal phenomena.